Well, hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Joel Schumacher. I'm a associate specialist with Montana State University Extension here in the Department of Agricultural Economics and Economics. And today we're going to talk a little bit about retirement planning for farmers and ranchers here in Montana. One of the things I'm going to do at the end of today's session is put up my phone number and my email. So if you have some additional questions or you'd like some additional information about some of the things we talk about, I will provide that contact information at the end and be happy to answer questions or visit with you about some of these topics a little bit further. So let's get started today. First of all, I just want you to think a little bit about your friends and neighbors here and which kind of folks do you know more of? Do you know more farmers and ranchers that have retired and they're under the age of 65? Or do you know farmers and ranchers, more of them, that are still working in farming and ranching after the age of 70? So my guess is that most of you know a lot of farmers and ranchers that are still working after the age of 70. And you probably know a lot less farmers and ranchers that have retired early, somewhere before age 65, and are not involved with the operation at all. There certainly are some, but I'm guessing you know a lot more folks in that second category. So why do we see that? Is that true of bankers and teachers and police officers and some of the other folks in our communities? I think you'll find it's a little bit different. I think we do see early retirement, more earlier retirement ages for a lot of folks who are not self-employed. So let's talk a little bit about why that is. So first of all, retirement is different for farmers and ranchers, right? This is going to be, farming and ranching is often a lifestyle, and for other folks, it's somewhere you go to and have that be a part of your day. So let's talk about where retirement kind of comes from maybe the traditional sources in the U.S., and then we can start to see why it's a little different for farming and ranching. So there's three traditional sources for retirement income, and they a lot of times call it the three-legged stool, which is personal savings, Social Security benefits, and then employer-based retirement plan. And right away, we're already seeing there that employer-based retirement plan is a little bit different because here in Montana, we do see a lot of owner-operated family farms. So you are your own employer, and oftentimes you probably don't have a employer-based retirement plan set up on your operation. So one of the biggest differences we do see, and this is true for a lot of self-employed, especially with a smaller business, not just farmers and ranchers, but oftentimes employers sponsor retirement plans. So I work here at MSU. Every month, a portion of my check on the employee side is sent off to my retirement plan, and then MSU matches a portion of that as well. Sometimes employees are required to contribute, and that's certainly true here at MSU, but it's also true of things like teachers in the state of Montana, our police and sheriff officers all do that, and some private employers as well. Other companies do allow you to make the choice whether to contribute. Now, as a farmer or rancher, and I may use the word farmer just to simplify the slides a little bit today, but either way, an agriculture producer, oftentimes you are your own boss, or if you're not your own boss, your family member is technically your boss. And could you set up an employer-sponsored retirement plan for your small business with one or two employees? Absolutely, you could, but my guess is most of you aren't going to do that. So this employer-sponsored retirement plan, which is such a strong integral portion of most people's retirement, is oftentimes missing from a lot of our farm and ranch retirement systems. So things are different, and we can compensate for that in some different ways. And then, as you all know, farming is probably not an 8-to-5 job. It's more of a lifestyle. And you're going to take probably a lot of your extra earnings over the years, and you're probably going to reinvest that back into your operation. So a lot of times you're going to have your assets tied up in your land, your livestock, your equipment, things that are a part of your employment, really. And then many of you are also going to be involved with operations that have more than one generation working in this family farm or ranch, and it's a little different than retiring and walking away if your son or daughter is also working on the place, or your brother or sister or something like that. So, which is different than, say, a police officer. When they choose to retire, it probably has nothing to do with the income of their son or daughter or brother or anything like that. So now that we've kind of laid out why it's a little bit different, let's talk about some things that are the same for everybody, and then some tools that farmers and ranchers can use to achieve whatever their goals are. So I want to lay out our kind of the steps we're going to walk through, and then we'll go ahead and walk through them all. So step one, we're going to figure out where we're at today. And then step two, we're going to figure out where we want to get to on our retirement journey. And then we'll talk about some tools that'll get you from here to there. And then also understanding some of the unforeseen events that can come up and some things we can do to plan for those as well. And then probably the most important thing in all of this is creating an action plan. You can do all those first 4 steps, but if you don't put this into action, the first 4 steps were probably not particularly useful. So step one is going to be figuring out where you are. So I look at this a lot like you're on a map and you're planning a road trip. If you don't know where you're starting, it's very hard to get anywhere. So this is what we are. We're figuring out where we're at on our map. So we need to list our assets. And you can create 2 lists if you want, one for your business and one for personal, if you track them separately, or you can create one if you'd like as well. So some of your assets is going to be land, maybe improvements on it. It could also be your house. Certainly your house is an asset, but you might lump it in with your land or you might treat it separately. It could be mineral rights, grain bins, livestock, vehicles, equipment, physical assets that you have. And then there's also going to be kind of another set of assets that are a little more intangible, things like bank accounts, certificates of deposits, things that are assets, but you can't physically touch them. And then you may have some designated retirement assets, whether that's an individual retirement account, some type of employer retirement account. Maybe you worked somewhere off the farm earlier, or maybe you've always had employment outside of the farm in addition to farming or ranching. So Social Security benefits, most folks have been paying into those over the years, and maybe some of you have some veterans benefits available to you as well. You may have also invested in things like life insurance or long-term care insurance, and those are certainly assets to you or at least to your family. And then some of you may also have some other valuables that don't fit into those, whether that's some type of collectibles or some other type of asset that we haven't listed. So whatever you might have, list all those things, and we're going to list the assets first, so all the things that are kind of a plus on your balance sheet. But then we also need to take a look at the liabilities, the things we owe to other people as well. So those could be a whole variety of different loans, whether that's a real estate loan, an operating loan, equipment loan, a car loan. Maybe it's credit card debt, or even student loan debt. Maybe it's any of those type of things. Could also be sort of more revolving credit, something like your fuel bill from your local supplier or a fertilizer bill. But you could also have some other liabilities as well, whether it's a past tax liability, child support, alimony. Could be a variety of other things that you've committed to over the years. But we need to list all of those as well. And then we also want to put down kind of a little bit of other information too. So how old are you when you're filling this out? What's your health status? Now, I don't necessarily mean you need to write down your blood pressure and your cholesterol counts, but do you have a personal health history of some type of ailment that may limit the number of years you live? Because we're really trying to plan for, not only now, but into the future as well. And then what's your family health history? Have folks in your family lived well into their 90s, or have they passed away in their 70s? And do you share any of the traits with them that may have led to that? And again, just a little bit of an idea of planning ahead and how many years of retirement we might have. And then also you want to write down or think about, who's depending on you for financial support. Do you have a spouse? Do you have children, siblings, parents? Kind of keeping that in mind of who you're helping support. So if you pass away, is there a way you can help provide for those folks as well? So one of the things I'll say about this list is don't make this list a huge project. If you make this a 3-day event and you're going to get appraisals on everything you own and all that, you simply won't do it. So keep this simple. My suggestion is either put it on a piece of paper or an Excel sheet and make a column that says 2017 or 2018 and write it all down. And leave room for other columns so you can come back next year and say, oh yeah, the pickup's probably worth a little less, bank account's gone up, and it's really easy to update then. So, and I would recommend updating this annually. It's a great progress report on your overall finances and specifically your retirement finances as well. And then also understand, it's not always going to be a straight line up. Life is going to happen. Changes are going to occur. You may have some positive things in one area of this and maybe some challenges in some other area. But it is really helpful if we have this list and we can kind of track how we've been progressing along. So if you do want an Excel sheet to do this on, feel free to email me and I would be more than happy to provide you with a nice template that you can save on your own computer and utilize if you'd like. So that's step one. I think some of you will also find out that a lot of that information you've probably gathered anyways when you applied for any type of loan recently. So a lot of this your banker is going to ask for anyways. Maybe not things like Social Security and whether you've got long-term care insurance, but certainly some of your bank account values, what land, those kind of things may already be together in one place. So now let's talk about this is where do you want to go? So we figured out where we're at on this map. Now, where do we want to get to in retirement? So I just want you to think about something here. I mean, when do you plan to retire? What's your vision of when you want to step away from what you're doing now? And is it you want to retire relatively young? Is it you want to work past age 70? Or you want to work until you're physically unable to do the work? I've certainly heard that quite a bit as well. And we're going to talk a little later about disability as well. There are a couple things to note about some of these ages. Obviously, the earlier we retire, probably the more years we have to fund of retirement. But then also there's some things that are pretty important. Health insurance is expensive. At age 65, we become eligible for Medicare coverage. So oftentimes people work until that point because they essentially then have their medical costs, or a big portion of them, taken care of. Their primary insurance is now provided. So sometimes people do use 65 as a magic number. Some of you use one of the Social Security full retirement ages as a magic number. Others, if you will wait until the circumstances are right. So, but it is a good idea to kind of have in mind what kind of goal you're shooting for. And then what does retirement mean to you? Some people want to stay on the farm or ranch and keep working. That's what they've done their life. It's what they enjoy doing, and they don't really have a desire to move on to something else. Some want to do that, but they want to take over maybe the stresses of the management and some of the full-time operating duties. So, maybe the operation's been turned over to the next generation in the family, but you still live on the place and you help out during planting or shipping of calves or branding time or haying, but you're maybe not necessarily working there full-time year-round. And then others do want to leave the ranch, move to town, maybe a few more social opportunities or different things to enjoy. I know a couple folks that retired from being 35 miles out in the country and took up golf for the first time, and have really spent quite a bit of time doing that in the community near where their ranch was. So other folks spend some time in a warmer climate than here, or at least in the winters. So that's certainly something I've done. But you may have some other completely different version of what you want to do. I know a local rancher who, they decided his family operation to lease the entire place out, and this gentleman was in his 60s, and he's done some things about being a tour bus driver and has really enjoyed, doing that seasonally as well. So it's up to you what you want to do, but these things can have some real implications on whether you're selling the operation, leasing it, whether you're relocating, or whether you're staying in place. So all those things can have a big financial impact on your retirement plan. The one thing kind of to keep in mind, though, is your retirement is going to fit you and your resources. So I might have my dream idea, or your neighbor or your parents do, or your brother or sister, but really it's going to be what fits you is what you need to plan for. And I like to say nobody can tell you how to spend your retirement years, and I meant that very honestly. And I was at a meeting, and somebody quickly informed me that that except for their spouse, because that was pretty important. And I said, well, that's probably true. And then I had some other people say, well, that's great, I'm married now, but I don't plan to be when I'm retired. And again, your personal situation, but you certainly may want to include your spouse or your family members if it's going to affect them. So people are different. Our retirement years is going to be different as well. So again, there's no one size fits all plan for what you should do in retirement. But thinking about some different activities of things you want to do and will enjoy doing, or you think you might enjoy doing. Certainly you hear people talk about traveling. Again, some people want to work. Maybe it's a little less full time, but maybe that's what they want to do. Others want to, volunteer in their community, go to sports games, take in, whatever entertainment they like in the community. Maybe that's a senior center, playing cards, whatever it could be. Some people want to spend a whole lot more time, with family or grandkids or whatever that might be. Also had a few people tell me that, been working with my family my whole life on the ranch, and when I retire, I'm going to take a little more time away from my family. So whatever your goals might be. And then, maybe you're picking up some kind of hobby. The reason I say to think about these is the price tag associated with these can vary quite a lot. If you're going to be traveling extensively, you can burn through a lot of cash in a hurry doing that. Obviously, if you're continuing to work and you're playing cards at the senior center and going to the local basketball games, probably not a very expensive lifestyle. Depending on where your family is, that can be expensive if you're spending a lot of time away to visit them, or maybe it's relatively close and that's an inexpensive thing. And again, hobbies, again, I think you can spend about an unlimited amount on a variety of different hobby activities, or you can have hobbies that are very low cost as well. So thinking a little bit ahead on that might help you budget a little bit for how much money you might need to do those activities you want to do. Your retirement years are not one single thing. They're going to change over time. So the first year you're retired and the last year of your life are likely to be quite different, especially if you're healthy and live into your 80s. Michael Stein wrote a book called The Prosperous Retirement, and there's one concept out of there that I really liked. And he talks about 3 phases of retirement. And he talks about the go-go years. And these are your kind of early years of retirement. Probably your health is very good. Travel is fun. Activities are easy. You enjoy these things. So you're out, you're in the community, you're doing things, you're going places. And then, maybe your health starts to slip a little bit. Some things, get a little bit harder. And he calls those the slow go years. And then finally, he talks about the no-go years. Your health isn't that great. Travel and activities are hard. It's not as fun to do those things. And I think about one set of my grandparents as they retired. They had a motorhome, and in the go-go years, they spent winters in Arizona, and they camped with friends, and they drove around to see grandkids, sporting events, and they did a lot of things, and they really enjoyed that. And then at some point they started just taking the RVs on weekend trips and quit going there to the south, and they still drove in their car and did some travel, but kind of closer home to home trips. And then finally they moved into some senior living options, and then assisted living, and finally a nursing home. And those were kind of the no-go years when they did very little traveling, and those few trips they did make were much more difficult. The cost of your go-go years is far more than your no-go years, right? The only thing you can really spend a lot of money on late in life is if you have nursing home care. Because by and large, your medical, the major portions of it are covered by Medicare. It can be very inexpensive unless you need that kind of care. So as we budget for this, oftentimes the big years are those early years of retirement, with income needs kind of dropping off over time. One of the other things I'd encourage you to do is write down your goals for retirement. You may want to discuss them with your family. If your plans affect your family, certainly you should include whoever that is. So if you're farming with your daughter, and you're planning on selling the place, and when you retire, they probably need to know about that. Doesn't mean they need to know everything. And if you've got a family that aren't impacted by your retirement decisions, maybe they don't need to be involved or aware of your plans. So, but I would say to write down your goals. Whatever those goals might be, you're far more likely to achieve them if you take the time to write it down. So you can write it on the end of your list of assets and liabilities, and then you can review it, and those goals might change over time. You might have a chance to do a little golfing and decide that that's not what you're going to do during your retirement years. So, but write it down, keep it somewhere, and then update it. So now that we've thought a little about some of the activities we might want to do, let's talk about how much income do I need? Where is it going to come from? So we're going to talk about all of these things. I mentioned earlier we had kind of the three legs of the retirement stool, which was Social Security, primarily employer-sponsored retirement savings, and then personal savings. Now, one of the other things I'd like to put in is there's kind of a couple other legs that we commonly see, and one is work, whether it's part-time or full-time. I certainly know a farming friend who sold his place when he was about 60 and retired. But he was essentially a hired man for a neighbor for about 6 or 7 more years, just taking an hourly wage. And he really enjoyed that, and that was a supplement to his retirement income then. And then also many of you have probably are aware of an asset sale, right? So you're getting out of farming and ranching, and maybe you're selling that operation to a family member or to someone else. But converting all those assets you've worked hard to build up over your career can also be a way to fund your retirement. So we're going to talk about each of those a little bit as well. Now, there's a whole lot of different tools out there for estimating what your retirement savings is going to generate in terms of retirement income. So you can certainly go out there and put in that I make $40,000 a year and I put 5% of my salary towards retirement and it's invested in the stock market. And I think I'm going to return 6% and I'm going to retire in 27 years. And those are all great. ChooseToSave.org has a number of those. But it doesn't reflect things like the volatile income of a farm and ranch operation very well. It doesn't reflect things like land sale or rental of income. So you can certainly go out and do that and use it as a tool, but I think you're going to find it's probably not the only tool you should utilize if you're trying to estimate what kind of retirement income you might have. So another way to think about how much income you might need is, well, maybe you just want to live at the average level. So the average per capita income in Montana is around $42,000. So that's one way to think about it. You could think about, okay, I want to make sure I can fund $42,000. You may have been living well above that or well below that, in the years leading up to it. So it's one benchmark. I wouldn't say it's the only way to look at it. Another way to look at it is to look at what people are actually spending in these different age groups. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics, this is a national number, not a Montana number like the previous one. They collect data on what they call consumer expenditures. So where do people's money go and how much do they spend? So they survey people periodically and then they publish these numbers and they break down how much is going for entertainment and how much for food and transportation and healthcare and all those different things. But there's kind of one thing I wanted to point out with this specifically. One, you'll see that people are spending a lot more than the Montana per capita income. Montana's average income is certainly well below the national number. But the other thing I wanted to point out with this is you notice here in the 55 to 64 age group that people are spending almost $60,000 a year. And then from 65 to 74, it drops to 50,000, and by age 75, you're only spending a little less than 40,000. So, one, this certainly matches up with Michael Stein's groups earlier of the go-go years, the slow-go years, and the no-go years. And again, the most expensive being those earlier years of retirement when you're healthy and you're out doing things. Okay, so I certainly think his concept like that is backed up by some data here as well. The second thing I want to point out with this too is that just because the national number might be 60,000, well, if you've been living on 50,000, you're unlikely to increase your spending, to follow this pattern. So if you've been used to spending $50,000 a year, my guess is that you'll start at that point and then somewhat decline as things move later as well. So again, just another benchmark that's out there, but do keep in mind that you're probably likely to need less income later in your retirement years. Again, with the one caveat about long-term care or nursing home care, that can be expensive. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but just an example here, if you're going to stay on the farm, live in the house you've been living in, you're going to help out a little bit maybe with your, let's say, son or daughter who's running the place. You go play cards at the senior center, you watch, local high school sports, and you visit the grandkids, and you go have coffee, once a day with the coffee club. That's a really low expense lifestyle, and a lifestyle that many people are very comfortable with, right? They're around the community they grew up in, the people they got to know over their life and their family, right? But other people are going to, go exploring once they're free of maybe some of the duties of the day-to-day farming and ranching. And, maybe they're going to help seasonally, but maybe they're going to travel in the winter, spend some time golfing, doing whatever those things might be. But I think you might find that, that's a much more expensive lifestyle. So again, thinking a little bit about the activities you think might be a good way to spend your retirement will help you plan for what your financial needs are going to be. All right, now let's move on to, now that we've kind of thought about where we are and kind of where we want to be, let's talk a little bit about some of the tools we can use to get from here to there. So again, stepping back to that three-legged stool, we've got Social Security, we've got retirement savings, personal savings, and then we put in part-time work. We could also, lump those personal savings into our land and equipment. Think about an asset sale, that auction sale when you stop operating your farm or ranch. So let's get started with Social Security. So a couple facts about Social Security. Number one, it was never designed to provide 100% of retirement income. It was designed to keep people out of soup lines in the 1930s. That was kind of the motivating factor. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But if you think you're going to get 100% of your retirement income off Social Security, I think you'll find it's probably not a particularly lavish lifestyle. The current average monthly benefit in the U.S. for retired workers is a little over $1,300 a month. All right, so that's somewhere in the range of what, $16,000 a year. Certainly helps, but many people want to supplement that number as well. The other thing I want to mention with that average monthly benefit, it is based on your actual work history. So those who made more money during their careers will have a higher benefit than those who had lower paid retirement. So just because 1,300 is the average doesn't mean that you're going to receive 1,300. And then I also want to point out, some of you have been getting mailed statements that say your benefit. If you can also go to socialsecurity.gov. You can log into your personal account and get an estimate of what your retirement benefit would be if you retired at your full retirement age, if you retired a year earlier, if you retired a year later. Those things are all available at the Social Security website. All right, a couple more facts about this. So currently 9 out of 10 individuals in the U.S. age 65 and older are receiving Social Security benefits. So again, 90% of our elderly Americans are receiving Social Security. Represents about a third of the total income for our elderly population in the U.S., not in each individual person, but as a group. And then this is kind of the one that's I would say somewhat shocking to me the first time I saw this number. 21% of married couples, so 1 in 5, and then 43% of unmarried people. That's about 2 in 5. People over age 65 rely on Social Security for 90% or more of their income. And remember, we talked about $1,300 being the average monthly benefit. If that's 90% of your income for a significant portion of the population, we do have a lot of seniors living on a very limited fixed income. So if you want to not be part of that group, this is a good time to do a little planning to make sure that you have some other income sources as well. Claiming your benefits, when you claim them from Social Security, somewhat determines how much your benefit will be. So I did say your benefit was based on your work history, and that's true. But then once you have your work history, we all have what's called a normal or full retirement age. For most folks who are retiring about now, it's age 66. For folks that were born age 1960 or later, it's 67. There's a sliding scale you can see here on the left side of the screen. I'll get my arrow out here. Over here, depends on your birth year as to when your full retirement is. But that estimate you're going to get generally is for if you retired at, say, age 66. If you retire before that, essentially your benefit is reduced. The earliest you can claim is 62. However, delaying until age 70 increases your benefit each year as well. And I'll show you an example of that on the next slide. So essentially the discount or increase is about 8% each year. So if you claim at age 65 and your full retirement age is age 66, you're going to get roughly an 8% discount rather by claiming at age 65 instead of age 66. And that's a permanent reduction that stays with you the remainder of the time you're on. But if you, for each year you delay, it adds about 8%. To your benefit as well. So you can see an example here. If you retired at age 66, if your benefit was going to be $1,000 based on your work history, waiting one more year would add $80 to that. Waiting another year would add $86 or so. So you're adding about 8% each year. Now, once you reach the age of 70, that 8% increase each year ceases. So there's typically rarely a reason not to claim once you've reached the age of 70. So you see a lot of age 62 to 70 is when most people are going to start claiming Social Security benefits. Now, you've probably heard somewhere on the news that Social Security is broke. It's come up periodically. In the 1980s, they were very worried about the long-term financial stability of the Social Security system, and there were some revisions made to it, and that's when we went from a retirement age of 65 to this sliding scale that'll eventually move us to 67. And then over the years, I remember when George Bush, the second George Bush and Al Gore were in their presidential campaign, it was a major issue of what to do with Social Security, and they had some different opinions as to how that would be. And then periodically it gets discussed ongoing. Currently, it kind of hasn't been kind of a front burner issue the last couple years, but I assume it will be again probably in the near future. So let's talk a little bit about the reason why it keeps coming up and what some facts are. So first of all, currently Social Security is not broke. Social Security has a considerable surplus that they have been collecting more money than they have been paying out for a whole number of years. Now, in about 2008, that changed, and I want to show you on the graph what that looks like. So this darker line that my green arrow is following right now, this is the total money that's flowing out of Social Security. And you'll notice right here is where we are today at that line. And then the lighter gray line that's a little bit more stable right here is the money flowing into Social Security. So you'll notice back here in about 2008, these lines crossed. So had we extended this much further back, the system has been collecting more money than it's paying out, and that has been true for quite some time. However, in 2008, that changed. So why did it change? Well, part of it was the recession. A number of people lost their work, and rather than continuing to work and pay in, they started claiming. But the really big issue that was happening, and we've known this for a long time, is the baby boom generation is reaching retirement age. So they had been paying in, and starting in about 2006, some of the earliest ones started to claim benefits, and now we are seeing that whole generation leaving the workforce, now and probably for another decade to come, we're going to see this wave. So we've seen this continued increase in the number of people claiming benefits. And then, by about 2025 to 2030, most of the boomers will have left the workforce and we'll be back to a more stable generational shift across the U.S. workforce. So what's happening right now? Like I said, the system is paying out more than it's taking in and has been since about 2008 or 9. So essentially the savings account they've built up, which sometimes you hear called the trust fund, they're essentially drawing down on some of those savings they've had in prior years. And that's going to continue to happen. However, when we get to 2034, the trust fund will be exhausted. At that point, what current law says is Social Security can only pay out the amount that they collect in. So it's not going to start borrowing money. What it'll do is reduce the payments to the beneficiaries across the system. So what that means and what they're currently projecting is that in 2034, they're only going to pay out 77% of the benefits they promised everybody. So people that think they're never going to receive a Social Security benefit because it's going broke, that's simply not true. They may receive a reduced benefit, but they will receive, in this case, about 77% of the benefit that they were planning on receiving. Now, one of the things I also want to point out, I had this same talk put together several years ago. I've updated some numbers. This is a projection into the future, so there's a lot of assumptions, and it turns out that 3 years ago, when they did this same projection, they thought the Social Security Trust Fund would run out of money in 2032. However, American workers have worked more and the economy's done better and they've had less payments out. So we've got 2 more years before we reach this deadline, right? So depending on how the economy does between now and 2034, this number could continue to be pushed into the future. It could come earlier as well. And likely there will be some legislative changes between now and 2034 that may also affect this as well. So something to think about, but also plan for the fact that it's likely you may receive a portion of the benefits you might be planning on receiving, especially for those of us who likely will still be working until we get up to that date. Another thing I want to think about, first of all, is death and disability. So farming and ranching is a dangerous occupation. It's not something we want to think about, but a recent Forbes magazine list, of the top 10 highest death rates by occupation, farming, ranching, and other agriculture activities was number 9 on that list. And 2 of the biggest dangers they listed was the fact that farmers and ranchers work with heavy machinery, and then they work with large animals. So both of those were causes of some of those deaths as well. And then just from the Social Security Administration, this is not farming or ranching specific, but today's 20-year-olds, by the time they reach age 67, 1 in 8 of them will die before they get there. Okay, so it's not something we typically want to think about, but I think it is important if you want to have a solid retirement plan, especially for your family members as well, to recognize that we may have this dream of being healthy and working to age 70, but the reality of the matter is it's not uncommon for you to be either disabled short-term, disabled long-term, or even die younger than you had maybe expected to because of the occupation we're in. So Social Security does have a disability payment system. You pay into that just like with your Social Security taxes. You do have to be paying into the system to be eligible. Earnings, you can earn up to 4 quarter credits per year. For every $1,260 you earn, you can get one of those credits. So if you make $5,000 a year, you get all 4 credits for a year. And then you need to have about 2 credits a year for 10 years to be eligible for disability credits. Now, there's some different rules for folks under 31 because obviously they don't have 20 years of work history or 10 years of work history. So, but basically you need to be earning at least 2 credits a year to be eligible to get benefits from that system. Now, one of the reasons I bring this up in this talk is many of you have variable income, and there may be years in which your farm or ranch operation shows 0 income or has a loss. You can still pay a minimal amount into the system to make sure you earn a credit, even if your overall operation is not showing a profit. So if you want to make sure you keep your disability insurance current, you may want to visit with your accountant at tax time to make sure you're earning enough credits to stay eligible for disability in the event that you need it. Now, just a couple facts about Social Security disability. The average age for someone to become disabled is 53. The average monthly benefit for a disability is about $1,172. And then in the U.S., there's just under 9 million workers who are currently disabled. In Montana, the number is about 28,000 roughly. And then there are also some children and spouses who are able to claim benefits because of a disabled family member, and there's about 1.7 million of those, or in Montana, a little over 5,000 people are receiving those type of benefits as well. Now let's talk a little bit about other retirement savings. So employer plans are certainly out there. 401k, 403b, and 457, those are all different IRS code sections, but a lot of times you do hear them. Essentially, those are defined contribution plans. So that's where you put in money and it goes into typically some type of stock or bond type investments. Company may also put in money. 401k plans are simply plans offered by a for-profit employer. 403b plans are offered by a non-profit employer, and 457 are offered by a governmental employer. So that's why you see the different code numbers. Beyond that, the details aren't extremely different between them. You may hear terms like a profit-sharing plan or an employee stock ownership plan, and they're again just different terms for some different features that can be offered within some of those plans we already talked about. So I'm going to group them all into employer plans. And then you can also have individual retirement accounts, whether that's a Roth or a traditional IRA that you can save for your retirement in as well. So first let's talk about pension plans. The defined benefit plan is another term for that. But these are the type of plans where employee and employers often put into them, and they go in on a pre-tax basis, and the contribution levels are typically set in advance, and the employee typically does not get to choose those. So, in Montana, our law enforcement community, our teachers, they're all going to be covered by this type of plan. Many, but not all of our state government employees, and then a lot of larger corporations have these type of plans as well, although we don't see a lot of the real big employers in Montana. Investment returns are the responsibility of the employer, so they're promising the employee a benefit, not whatever the investment returns might be over time. So the way these work in terms of what it is you've got this fixed amount you're contributing each month out of your paycheck, but then likely your monthly benefit is it's based on your average salary. Usually over a 3 or 5 year period, they average it. So you can't just try to spike your income in the last month to change your benefit. So they'll take your average salary, let's say it's $30,000 in this case, and the number of years you've worked for that company. And it doesn't have to be full years. It's typically measured on a monthly basis. And then some type of benefit factor that's written into the plan document that determines how the plan runs. Usually that's a 1.5% to 2% type number. So the way that would work is someone whose average final salary was $30,000. They worked there for 30 years. They had this service factor of 1.5%. That means their average, their benefit is going to be $13,500 per year. That'll be their retirement plan benefit. And this won't affect their Social Security benefits, as it'd be in addition to any Social Security benefits they may be receiving. So it's about $1,125 a month. Those payments will continue until the employee passes away. Now, some people also want to make sure they have enough income for their spouse. Let's say a husband and wife are there. Let's say the husband has this type of plan, but he's worried that, I retire at 65. If I die at 67, what will my spouse do for income? So you can change the terms of that benefit so that it continues until the employee and the spouse pass away. Or you can also change it to say, well, until the employee passes away, but at least a minimum of 20 years of payments. So they will make those adjustments for you. If you'd like to have those payment options, it will reduce the total amount you're receiving, but you get a guarantee then that it's income for your spouse as well. So there are some adjustments that can be made, and it may be increased for cost of living during your retirement. So that $13,500 might be year one. Year two, there may be a 1 or 2% adjustment to that to account for inflation. And typically these benefits are taxable income. So it went in on a pre-tax basis and it comes out taxed for the first time. So those are defined benefit plans. If you've got one of those, great. And that's a way you can convert this into sort of monthly income and think about what kind of benefit that might be. However, it's more common for many of us to have defined contribution plans. And this is your 401k or 403b are the most common types of these. SEPs and SAR-SEPs are also out there, and simples. There's a couple other terms as well, but 401k and 403b is usually what we're going to hear here. So both the employee and the employer, they put money in during the working part of someone's career. Those contributions go in on a pre-tax basis, or they're tax deductible. And oftentimes the employee gets to pick how much they want to put in. So I can put in 2% of my salary, or 5 or 10. There is a maximum number, but most people don't get anywhere near that. And then the earnings go in, and that's the responsibility of the employer. So my $100 goes in this month, and if it does really well, that's my benefit. If it loses money, that's my responsibility as well in terms of my retirement benefit. And then the withdrawals from that account are going to be taxable when they come out during retirement. So again, they're taxed one time. In this case, it's during retirement. So you can also try to, if we're trying to think about monthly income, it's a little harder than with the defined benefit plan, where we knew what our annual income would be based on that formula. In a defined contribution plan, the thing we're more likely to know is what our account balance is. So let's just say, for example, we'd saved up $100,000. How much is that in terms of monthly or annual retirement income? So first of all, it could go up and down based on your investment choices. You get to pick oftentimes how much you want to withdraw from that fund. So if I think I want to buy a motorhome, I could take $60,000 out all in one batch, or I could take out smaller amounts as we go. So here's a couple ways we can think about turning that $100,000 into monthly income. So first of all, we need to have a couple of sort of assumptions. So what's our account balance going to start with? How much are we going to withdraw? Are we still contributing to it? Are we going to contribute between now and when we retire? And what kind of investment returns are we hoping to get on this account? So I'm going to put some assumptions in, and we'll go through a couple examples. So first of all, I went out and just took a look at some different historical investment returns. So if we're trying to predict the future, usually looking at the past is our best way. So this happens to be the average stock market return, or at least the return for the S&P 500. Our 10-year average is about 6.75%, and it's been slightly lower than that if we look at the 20 and 30-year averages, but we're over 6% and less than 7% for each of those. Now, if we're looking at bond investing, which is less risky, the 10-year average has been 4.2%, but if we move back to the 20 or 30-year average, we're getting closer to 6%. We're certainly in that 5% range. And then CDs, oftentimes, people choose less risky investments, certainly as they get older. This would be a very low-risk investment. And you can see the 10-year average is less than 1%. 30-year average is a little over 3%. So oftentimes people have a blend of stocks, bonds, and maybe some kind of savings account type investments in their retirement plan. So we're going to blend a few of these and try to predict a little bit how we might do. Another thing I wanted to put up with this graph, this is just graphing the various returns from 1980 to about 2013. The blue line is the stock market return. So you'll notice that's the one that averaged the highest overall, but it also had the most volatility, which means it varies from year to year, month to month. And you'll notice there's some big spikes. It had some great years, and it had some big down years as well. When you move into the bonds and the 6-month CD, it's less risky, but you also notice the returns from year to year are much more stable as we look across time. So less risk, typically less return, but also you don't have that possibility of having a big year or the down year as we kind of trade off that. So there's a couple ways we can think about turning that pot of money, however we've chosen to invest it, into retirement income. And one way to do is that we're just going to take out whatever the earnings are on that account each year. So we're never going to touch the principal. We're only going to take the earnings out. So one of the advantages of that is we're never going to run out of money, and we'll be leaving that principal for our heirs as a legacy to them or to an organization. But the problem with this is you're never going to know what your income is, right? It's going to vary every year. It could be zero. Some years could be quite a lot. This is also, you're never touching that principal. So you could be thinking about converting some of that principal into income as well. So it's lower monthly income than had we been taking a portion of that principal and turning it into retirement income as well. And then also you'll run into something called required minimum distributions at age 70 and a half. The IRS will require you to start taking a minimal distribution out of your retirement accounts. So if your plan was to take out a small amount each year, you may have to take a minimum out to meet that required minimum distribution rule. So that's one method. If we think about 100% or $100,000 account, if we had it in the stock market, all of it, and getting that 6% return, that's $6,000 of income a year or $500 a month. But if we had it in the CD type investment earning 1%, that's $1,000 of income a year, right? A whole lot less than $100 a month. And if the account loses 2%, then what do we do? It's no income at all doing that method. So what if you need more income off that 100,000? I think there's some things we can do. Or what if you need more consistent income? So we're going to rely on a little bit of research here. And there's kind of a variety of ways to apply this, but a couple different research studies have shown that this method generally, statistically, if you did it over and over and retired at different times, you're unlikely to outlive your money. So it's called the 4% rule. It's a rule of thumb. It's not a guarantee. But essentially what this is you're going to withdraw 4% of whatever your account balance is in year one of retirement. So $100,000 account, you get to take 4% out. Now in year two, we're going to take that 4% out again, but we're going to increase it for inflation. So in this choice, I picked 3% as inflation. So year two, we're going to withdraw $4,120. Same thing in year three. I picked inflation of 4% there. So $4,285. So you can see the pattern of this is how much income we're going to take off that $100,000 account balance each year. So one of the questions is how long is your money going to last? Right? Most people don't want to outlive their funds. So again, here's some inflation averages. Our 10-year average is less than 2%, but if we look at the 20 or 30-year, you're getting a little over 2% and then, over 2.5% on the 30-year average. So inflation certainly matters when you're running some different simulations on this. How your money is invested also matters. So many people choose a 40% stock, 40% bonds, and a 20% CD mix of investments. So I used the 20-year average inflation and the 20-year average returns, and we did that 4% rule. Okay, and I ran all those numbers, and actually you don't run out of money. In 30 years, your balance is still $93,000. So essentially, your account is basically earning about as much as you're taking out. So even after 30 years, you still have quite a bit of your, over 90% of your principal is still remaining, and you've been able to get that income from that account. So that's one way to, think about that. But let's put a couple other assumptions in here. And by the way, the reason I use 30 years is, if you retire, let's say at age 65, 30 years from age 65 would put you at age 95, which is, well beyond the normal life expectancy for most people. So typically, if you can get 30 years of funding from your retirement sources, that's sufficient for most of us if we're just trying to meet our own needs. But let's change our investment thing and say we don't want that much risk. We're worried about some down years during our retirement, so we're only going to put 10% in stocks, 40% in bonds, and we're going to put more of it in a CD or a savings account type investment. Otherwise, we'll use the same assumptions, 4% rule, average inflation for 20 years, and we're going to use the 20-year market returns that I showed earlier. In this case, our money is going to still last 33 years. After 30 years, your balance will be about $16,000. So again, if you retired at 65, this means you're going to run out of money at age 98. Okay. So you can change some different assumptions, but that gives you a little bit of an idea of another way to think about converting that lump sum money that you might know about into what monthly income might be. Another way to, if you're worried about not outliving your money, is to buy an annuity. And what's called a single premium annuity. And this is where you transfer a lump sum of money at one time. So essentially you're writing a check, and it could be from your IRA account or from your 401k account. And we're going to give that typically to an insurance company. And in exchange, they're going to give us a monthly set of payments for the rest of our life. And again, you can do it on your lifespan only, or you and your spouse, or for the next 30 years. But that can be a way that you're guaranteed not to run out of money. Right? So if you want to make sure you've got money until you're 100, you could buy a 35-year guaranteed annuity, or for your life, or based on your life span that you will receive payments. Now, the downside of this might be, right, is that let's say you give them all $100,000 and you say, I want to receive payments, and they figure out a number, and you've got it set up so that when you pass away, the payments end. Well, if you pass away at age 69, you've only received 4 years of payments and all of your money is gone. But if you live to be 106, payments would continue until that as well. So there again, you're transferring some risk there. If you die early, the financial side of this is the financial return on that investment is probably not particularly good. On the other hand, if you live a long time, it's very good. So there's some risk in terms of that, but you do guarantee that you won't run out of income. Okay, let's pause here for just a minute, and then we will start back up. All right. Hope you've all had a quick break there. Now let's talk a little bit more about individual retirement accounts, some of the ways that those can be helpful in terms of saving for your retirement. So first of all, I put individual retirement accounts. That's not actually the correct name. They're actually individual retirement arrangements is the technical term. But essentially we have traditional IRAs, and this is where money goes in on a pre-tax basis. And it's taken out as taxable income, and it grows tax-free over that time period. Roth IRAs are kind of the exact opposite. The money goes in on a post-tax basis, grows tax-free, and then is drawn tax-free as well. So again, they're both taxed only one time, but essentially there is some tax benefits in terms of how the earnings grow with both accounts. And they're somewhat similar, just again, when you pay your taxes is kind of the difference. So with both types of accounts, generally there's a 10% penalty if you withdraw these before the age of 59 and a half. Now, there are some exceptions to those rules, first-time home purchase, education, a few things, but this is probably not the place to save for your next new car. You don't want to put it in and then take it out and pay the penalty. So the nice thing about an individual retirement account, though, is you're not required to contribute each year. You can actually contribute up until your tax deadline for the previous year. So you can wait until you know how your year finished up before you contribute if you want to. So sometimes that's nice for folks that have volatile income. Now, the maximum amount you contribute is $5,500 for 2017. You don't have to contribute the full amount. You can contribute $300 if you'd like. And if you're over age 50, they let you do what's called a catch-up contribution, which just adds another $1,000 to the maximum amount that you can put in. So again, contributions are generally tax deductible, and then withdrawals are going to be taxable for a traditional IRA. There are some income limitations on who can participate in these. So I'm just going to talk about the individual here. So if you're making $62,000 or less, you could put that in and you can make the full deduction on your current tax return. It's kind of a sliding scale up to $72,000. If you make over $72,000, you can't take that deduction. Numbers are the same, but they're $99,000 for married filing jointly. And again, there's a sliding scale for a partial deduction. But one thing I do want to point out is this: these limits do not apply if you are not covered by an employer plan. So if you're not working somewhere with an employer-sponsored plan, whatever your income is, you should be eligible to contribute and deduct that amount on your taxes. So this can be an issue to watch out for, but it's not going to affect everybody by any means. Now, Roth IRA, same contribution limit, $5,500 a year, $1,000 extra if you're over age 50. Contributions are not tax deductible, right? So they're not going to affect your current year taxes. And then the withdrawals from that, including the earnings, are going to be tax-free. So when you go to tap those in retirement, you're not going to pay taxes on them. One thing to keep in mind, essentially you're paying taxes now versus later. If you have some guess on what your income tax brackets might be, sometimes that can help you choose between a traditional and Roth IRA. So if you're in a high income tax bracket now, a contribution to a traditional IRA is going to give you a relatively large tax deduction. If you're in a low income tax bracket now, that same contribution is going to give you a lower tax reduction now. So higher earners now who are expecting to be lower earners in retirement oftentimes would benefit more from a traditional IRA. If you're a low earner now and expect to have higher income when you retire, then a Roth IRA might look more appropriate. For those of you with fluctuating year-to-year farm and ranch incomes, in a big income year, you might want to consider a traditional IRA more. If it's a much more modest earning year, you might want to consider a Roth IRA. So you can vary from year to year. You could also contribute some to both each year. One thing I will note here, though, this $5,500 limit, that applies to all types of IRAs. So if I put $5,000 into a Roth IRA, I can only put $500 into a traditional, because then my total contribution would be $5,500. So this is just a tool you can use to help save that. There are some income limitations on a Roth IRA, but they're much higher, over $100,000, so they don't affect most people. You can also save for your retirement in other types of traditional savings accounts, investments, brokerages, bank accounts. The nice thing about these, they're easy to set up. You may already have these accounts. Typically, there's no tax benefits associated with them, but they do give you flexibility if you need to pull it out. Say for you've had a couple down years of income in the agriculture side, you can tap into that money without penalties, which may not be the case with some of the other types of retirement savings. So, and I would say, is it good or bad that you can access that money? It can be very helpful in terms of helping you through some harder financial times now. But again, you're kind of borrowing against your own future by taking money out that was set aside for retirement. So another way that you can save for your retirement. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about that is more specific to farming and ranching that you generally won't read about if you read the national articles is how do we convert things like equipment and land into retirement income? So certainly probably every one of you has probably been to, a livestock liquidation auction, right? Auctioneer comes out and somebody's retiring, getting out of the business, passed away, and they're selling off their line of equipment, maybe their herd, right? Maybe the whole farm as well. And they're taking, all those physical assets, right? And by the end of the day, they're going to be turned into cash. And then you can also think about your land, or maybe you're going to lease that land. It's pretty common across Montana that we're leasing land, whether it's from the neighbor that used to farm, or whether it's from your parents that are retired now. We see a lot of leasing among family members and things, and also from families that used to farm or operate an independent operation too. And that certainly can be retirement income as well. And then we also have folks that, when they are done farming or ranching, they sell the land, right, to the next person, to the neighbor, whatever it might be. And then again, they've got cash they can utilize. I want to bring up one thing with this too, is about your home. Many of you, if you are thinking of selling or leasing your farm or ranch to someone else, are you going to continue to live out on the farm or ranch, especially if it's out of town a ways? Is your house senior friendly to age in? And then also, is your house useful to the new owner of your land, or even to the new leaser of your land? If you're leasing your entire place to the neighbor and they don't intend to add additional people to take over your operation, leasing the house to them may be of very little value to them. Same as if you're selling it as well. If they've already got 2 houses on their place and they're operating it, and this is just going to allow them to expand but not add people, maybe it's worth keeping that home, or having some type of arrangement where you can stay in it, because it's not going to be of a great deal of value to them. So on the other hand, if you're near a city like Bozeman or Billings, that land or that house may have quite a bit of value on its own, regardless of whether the new owner chooses to live in it. Montana Ag Statistics Service certainly collects data. They do it on a county level. I didn't present it here on a county level. These are statewide averages, but you can certainly get a feel for what lease rates are going in your county, in your area. So if you're thinking, okay, we're going to get out of the business, how much income can I get by leasing out my current land? And sometimes those grazing leases are written in the terms of per head. Sometimes it's AUM, sometimes it's CalCAF pairs. But here's some 4-year averages. AUM rates were about 22.75 per month. CalCAF averages were a little over $25. So you can think about, okay, how many AUMs does my land typically have? How can I lease that out? We can also think about renting cropland out or pasture land. Irrigated rent, again, 4-year average is running about $82 an acre in Montana. Non-irrigated, between a little over $25 an acre for cropland that way. And then pasture land's around $6 an acre. One thing I will say, especially with the pasture land, that can vary a great deal. Things like access to water, does it adjoin the neighbor's place so it's easy for them to put cattle in, can greatly change what the value of a particular piece of land is beyond just the AUM, production number on there. But we can certainly take a look at these and then estimate what kind of income those might generate in a given year. We can also think about selling the land. Again, some Montana state averages. Irrigated land selling for just a little under $3,000 an acre. Non-irrigated farmlands about $815 an acre. And pasture lands $633 an acre has been kind of the recent average. And again, I'm sure these numbers vary a great deal geographically within Montana. And again, they are released by the Ag Statistics Service on a county level basis. But it gives you a little bit of a benchmark as to think about what kind of money you could get if you were going to liquidate some of your assets and turn them into retirement income. Now, a couple things to note. Capital gains taxes. If you're going to sell land, the gain on that might be taxable at a 15% rate. There is an exemption for selling your home, so you may need to work with an accountant, but just remember, every dollar you get, some of that will change in terms of turning that into cash at the end. And you may have some taxes on gains on depreciated assets, barns, fences, irrigation systems, those kind of things. And then you're also likely to pay a broker's fee of about 7% to your real estate broker. So I want to kind of compare a few things here by looking at simple kind of land example, and we'll follow it through a couple different ways in terms of thinking about what kind of income it is. So we're going to start that we've got 100 acres of cropland, and again, obviously this is a very small number, but it's nice and round, and the example will work regardless of how big your operation is. Let's say you paid $20,000 for it at some point in the past, and now we sold it for this kind of statewide average number of $85,000. And again, there's going to be no buildings or improvements, just to make our example real simple. So we're actually going to go owe capital gains tax of about $9,700 on this. And the way we're going to calculate that is we sold it for $85,000, but we had basis in this property of $20,000. And that's, again, the price we paid for it. Then we're going to multiply the difference in that by 15%, and that's how we get to that. So that $9,750 is not available for your retirement income. And we're probably going to pay a real estate broker about $59.50 for 7% of that. So the net proceeds that we're going to walk away from and be able to put in our bank account is just under $70,000. Okay, so that 100 acres turned into $70,000 we can use to help fund our retirement. Now, another thing to think about, we could rent the property out, lease it to someone. Again, let's put in that statewide average of about $25 an acre on our 100 acres. That's going to get us about $2,500 of income each year. Now, a couple things to note too. The landowner's still going to be paying property taxes usually. On the other hand, the landowner may benefit if land prices increase. And over the last, I think 11 years, land values have increased about 4.4% per year for dryland cropland. So again, prices could go down. No guarantee that land prices will always go up. But those are kind of two things to keep in mind with that as well. Now, on the previous slide, we said if we sold it, we'd end up with about $69,000 of cash that we could have in our bank account when we're done. If we thought about investing that cash and then using the earnings from that to fund our retirement, if we got a 3% return, that would get us about $2,000 a year that we could use towards our retirement. If we got 5%, we'd get $3,400 a year towards our retirement. And if we got $4,800, we'd get 7% towards our retirement. So again, you can kind of compare. Again, the rental income would be about $2,500. 5%, it's about $3,400, but you get the benefits of any land increases if you still continue to own the land as well. A couple things to think about too if you're thinking about selling your land. Are you also selling your home with it? So by liquidating this, our home was on a corner of the land. Do we need to buy another house in town? How much would that cost? What's kind of the financial side of that? And then what's your basis in the property? Basis is the price you paid for it or the market value of it when you inherited it. So if you received this from an older family member, the basis jumped up to the current market value when that person passed away, and you inherit that basis at the higher level. So higher basis means lower capital gains. So if you've got really low basis in a particular piece of property, maybe you want to hold on to it until you pass away, so the basis will jump up. That could be beneficial to your the next generation or whoever might inherit that from you. And then some other things to think about. Are other family members currently involved with your operation? So if you sell the place, is your son or daughter going to be out of work? Are they okay with that? Are you okay with that? And then finding someone to lease the land from you. In some places, you might get multiple bids. In some other places, might be harder to find someone there as well. And then we have also had some folks that do this as a custom farming operation. So as they've backed out of the operation, they're hiring somebody to come in and do seeding. They're hiring somebody to come in to harvest for them. So you're still the farmer and on paper and the owner and the financial kind of risk taker associated with it, but maybe you're not physically doing the day-to-day operations that are required to run that farm. Working in retirement. So there's certainly a number of different reasons that people work in retirement. One of which is they need the income or want the income. I recently talked to a fellow who retired and he's doing some part-time work, and I asked what his goal was or why he was working, and he said, well, I want to work enough to support my golf habit. So that's fine. We've all got our different motivations in terms of that. Some people like and need to be involved with something. So they want to work maybe, for that social side of it. Maybe they enjoy the work. I certainly know a number of farm and ranch folks that this is a lifestyle. It's all they know and they enjoy what they do. So as long as they can keep doing it, they want to do that. Some really enjoy it, but they want the flexibility of maybe part-time work. I certainly know someone who was a full-time farmer and retired, and now they're kind of a hired man for the neighbor. And if they want to leave for a month and go do some other things, they can coordinate that and they can do that, which they couldn't do when they were the owner operator of the operation. So, and some people feel, well, if I've turned it, I've turned the operation over to my son or daughter, but they really need my help still. So sometimes you feel needed in that way and obligated to work. And there have been a few other folks that quit working at maybe the job they did, which allowed them to do something. Maybe it's volunteering, maybe it's with pay or low pay, but something they've always wanted to do or enjoyed doing. So a lot of different reasons other than just money that you might want to work in retirement. Another thing to think about is if you're working while you're claiming Social Security benefits, there are a couple rules you should be aware of. So if you retire prior to your full retirement age, which for most people it's going to be somewhere between 66 and 67. So if you start claiming benefits somewhere between 62 and let's say 66, these rules are going to apply to you. And essentially you can make up to $16,920, and that's just fine. You can claim your full Social Security benefit and you can work that much. But if you work over that amount, they're going to reduce your Social Security benefit by $1 for every $2 of earnings that are over that $19,000. So if I was making $17,920 and I'm age 63, I've made $1,000 over the limit, they're going to take $500 away from my Social Security benefit. So it's advantageous to think ahead if you are going to be working and claiming benefits in that 4-year period. Once you've reached your full retirement age, you can claim full benefits and work as much as you like. And there are some special rules for mid-year retirements. So if you retire at age 64, so you have 9 months of higher earnings and then you retire, they have some special rules that account for that, so you won't be penalized. So those are kind of the different tools. Now let's talk a little bit about some of the uncertainties that are happening. So we're predicting the future here, both stock market returns, what your future earnings might be, even things like what kind of healthcare options you might have in 20 years. So lots of different things that could happen between now and then. So how do we incorporate some of these things in? And I just want to kind of bring them up so you can think through a few things. So first of all, your health is probably your number one biggest unknown in retirement. It's going to determine the activities that you're going to want to do when you're retired. You know, if you've got 2 bad knees and a bad ankle, you're probably unlikely to be out on that golf course, and you may not even want to travel a whole lot, right? So it may determine the activities that you enjoy. Your health can also determine the length of your retirement, right? If you've got some kind of health issues, you may not live till you're 95. You may pass away decades prior to that, right? And then healthcare costs is also a big issue, right? So we do at age 65 get Medicare coverage, which is your primary health insurance, but most people get a Medicare Advantage or supplement plan to wrap around that. But certainly that can play a financial role as well. And again, you're going to know more about your health than I'm going to know, and there's things you may not be able to predict in 20 years. But you may also know that you do have some type of chronic health issue or a family history of something that may lead you to have a little bit of insight into maybe how long you might live or how healthy you might be, those kind of things. So there are some things we can do to manage health issues. I mean, certainly there's medical side things, but we can also use insurance to manage some of the financial side of that. So, you know, disability insurance, health insurance can help protect those assets that we've built up. Long-term care insurance, which is kind of nursing home care, you know, it's running in the range of $60,000 to $70,000 a year. You know, with average stays being over a year in length, that can be a big financial hit later in life. So long-term care insurance can help protect you from that risk. And then also, if you're operating that farm or ranch, who's going to operate that short or long term if you do have a health issue? Is there someone who can step into that role for you? What would be a short-term plan? What would be long-term? Would your spouse have to leave the farm or ranch without you there? So, and then this is all going to kind of feed in a little bit to doing a little bit of estate planning too. You can do a lot of good things for your family by preparing your estate to be transferred in whatever way suits you and your family situation. Doing no estate planning oftentimes can create a lot of hard feelings in a family, can make it very messy, and it can also make it very expensive to settle an estate. So planning ahead can, one, improve some family relations, and two, make it a lot easier and a lot cheaper to transfer your estate on to the next generation. But I also want you to think about maybe some unusual things. You know, what if you live to 100 and you'd always said, well, I'm going to die young? Well, you might not. So it's good to say, okay, what would happen to my plan if I live 10 years longer than I thought? What if you need nursing home care? What if your spouse needs nursing home care? Or what if you need it and your spouse is 25 miles out of town? Would they move to town? Do you want them to move to town? You know, how would you handle that kind of situation? Would you turn over the operation to someone else so that you could support your spouse, you know, while they're getting that kind of care they need? Maybe you'd always planned on selling it to the kids. Can they afford to buy you out? What kind of arrangement would work for that? So some different things you can think about. And then also some unusual things like what if you outlive your children? You know, I certainly was at a conference a while ago, and they were talking about an estate plan that was set up, and you know, there was grandpa, there was son, and there was grandson involved, and they'd all set it up. Grandpa was in his 80s, that son would, you know, inherit everything. and then he and grandson would continue to operate the place. So there were 3 generations involved. And the middle generation died first. He had a heart attack and he passed away. So now it was grandpa in his 80s and grandson in his mid 20s. Again, wasn't what they had planned. What would happen? Do you have a plan that would handle something like that? So, and then retirement assets could, farm land values certainly have gone down in the past. That could happen again. And the same with financial assets as well. So what would that do to your retirement income? How could we make adjustments to account for that? Insurance is one tool we can use to manage some of these risks as a backup plan. Maybe you need a base level of income you're comfortable with, and then you're willing to let the rest have more variability. So it's a tool. It's not always the right tool, but it's something to consider. But then also, what would you have? What kind of options would you have if one of these events took place? Could you work longer? Could you work in retirement when you didn't plan to? Can you spend less on something? Would you change your lifestyle? How would we deal with this thing? And if you find out you've got a situation that's very challenging to deal with, maybe we need to save some additional funds or work longer to be able to accommodate that. Now, the last and maybe most important part is once you've thought through these things, you figured out where you're at, where you want to go, what tools you might use to get there, thinking a little bit about some of these risks, now we have to actually take some action, right? If we don't do this steps, the other 4 steps were maybe interesting, but not really productive until we finally put them into action. So I think the easiest way to show this, I just want to do a quick simple example here with Jim and Rose. We're going to say they're both 64 and that they, own 640 acres and they rent about 1,000 more of dry land farming. They own some equipment, about $340,000 worth, and they've got an equipment loan for $90,000. Again, very simple example, but I just want to plug through how we might be able to think about retirement income for these folks. So Jim has 30 years of employment that was covered by Social Security. Rose only has 3 years. She primarily was a stay-at-home spouse. So the way she's going to claim Social Security is she's able to claim off her husband's record, which is 50. She's going to be able to claim 50% of the value that Jim has earned over his career is how Social Security handles that. They do have an IRA with $60,000 in it. They don't have any employer-sponsored retirement plan. Okay, and then they've also got some personal savings of about $120,000. So taking these facts, let's take a look and see what their monthly income looks like and what kind of options they might have. So they can certainly lease that 640 acres of farmland out. Now the rest of their land was leased, so they won't be getting any income from that. They can sell their equipment. Now they're going to use the proceeds from that equipment sale to pay off any remaining loans they had. So the net out of that is going to be $250,000. And we're going to use that 4% rule that we talked about earlier in terms of converting that, really all of these assets into retirement income. So they're both going to claim their Social Security, we're going to say at age 64, which is 2 years before their full retirement age. So that's going to reduce 8% each year, so about 16% reduction compared to had they waited until age 65. And I mentioned earlier, Rose will claim based on Jim's working history, not her own, because she was a stay-at-home mom or spouse for most of those years. So that leasing out their land is going to get them about $16,000 a year. Selling their equipment and then using the 4% rule as a withdrawal rate on the proceeds from that's going to get us about $10,000 of income a year. That IRA is going to get them about $2,400 of income each year. Jim's personal savings, we're going to convert that also at the 4% rule, so that's just under $5,000. Now Jim's Social Security is going to be about $11,000, again based on his work history. And then Rose is going to be able to claim 50% of Jim's value. So their total income then from kind of their main sources here is going to be $50,000. Okay, is it enough? Is it not enough? Well, let's assume for a minute that it's not enough. What if they work one more year? What's one more year going to do to their financial situation? So we're going to assume that the land and the financial accounts all increase by 3% over 1 year. right? Could be anything. We're predicting the future, but all of those numbers increase a little. Now the equipment is going to go down in value, right? That tractor's got more hours on it now. Things are a little bit less, so we're going to say that's went down some. Now they've also made some more loan payments on that equipment loan, so that's going to be lower as well. So the net proceeds out of this is going to be up just a little bit. And then their Social Security benefits are both going to increase by 8% because they've waited one more year to claim them. They're now age 65 when they're making that first claim. So land lease goes up just a little tiny bit. Equipment proceeds went up some, the IRA, personal savings, all of these things have increased, including the Social Security payments. And now they've increased their total annual income by an extra $2,000 a year. And they have one less year of retirement to fund. Okay, so they're less likely to outlive their earnings as well. Now, some people, when they work a little longer, they take a little higher rate out. So maybe instead of 4%, maybe they start at 4.1% to account for the fact that they're going to have one less year of retirement that they're going to need to fund. So that's another kind of situational tool you can use to think about, do I have enough retirement income? If not, what does working one more year do for me? So one way to increase your retirement security on the financial side, you can certainly work longer, gives you another year to save, pay down debts, Social Security benefits might go up. You can save a higher percentage rate while you're working. If you do this calculation and you're age 50 and you're like, well, I'm not on track, maybe you need to account for that and be saving a higher percentage in some format between now and when you hope to retire. You can think about, we had our dream retirement. Maybe we're going to, think, okay, well, traveling to Arizona every month sounds good, but I just don't have the resources to do that. That's another way you can make your retirement income work, is change what activities you're going to do. And then maybe you are going to do some work during retirement. Maybe it's part-time, maybe it's full-time to supplement your income. That's another way you can do. And then maybe you're going to downsize your house, or maybe you're going to have less vehicles or cheaper vehicles. A number of different tools can be used to reduce income or expenses in that way as well. So there are some tools if you think about those in advance. So a couple kind of parting points I want to leave you with when you're creating your plan. So the earlier you start is better. If you haven't started yet, now is the perfect time. Right? Waiting any longer does not improve your chances, but it's also never too late to improve your situation. If you're doing this for the first time at age 63, you can still improve, just like we saw with that last example there. We can make an improvement even if we've only got a couple more years until retirement. And then you also might want to consider, if you're sitting down and you're doing some, kind of budgeting for your farm in terms of, here's how much income I need, here's my loan payments, here's what the seed's going to cost and fertilizer. Maybe you need to write in that retirement contributions is an expense. And if your operation isn't generating enough income to cover that expense as well, maybe you need to rethink your plan and say, okay, maybe this isn't working and I need to think about something else, expanding different industry, some other way to be involved. And then not everybody's a retirement expert. This probably isn't what most people want to think about all day, every day. So don't be afraid to reach out for help and ask questions about Social Security, ask questions of your IRA advisor, talk to your banker. All those folks may be able to assist you with some information to help you achieve your financial goals. And a couple other things. We've covered a lot of information today. Don't get overwhelmed. If we talked about 15 things today and you only take on 2 of them, well, that's 2 more than you had taken care of before. So, take one step at a time. See where you're at. See each step you make is going to be a positive development towards that. And it's never too early. So if you're 24 years old and you're just getting started or in the operation, now's the time. You've got lots of flexibility and you can really end up in a great place. But it's also never too late to get started as well. So wherever you're at, you can certainly improve your situation and help achieve your goals. As I mentioned I would do earlier, here's my contact information. 994-6637 is my phone number, and there you can see my email.